For 9 summers, my parents drove me 400 miles and left me at my great-aunt's sewing shop so my brother could have what my mother called a real family vacation. 9 summers, 9 postcards, every one of them signed with the same 3 cheerful words. The morning after I graduated high school, my car was already packed. By sunrise, I was 2 states away, and nobody in that house knew which direction I'd gone. It took them 4 years to find me. And when my mother finally walked through the door of my shop in Astoria, Oregon, 2,200 miles from Indiana, she looked around at everything I had built with my own 2 hands, and the first sentence out of her mouth told me she had not driven all that way to apologize. She had driven all that way to collect something. If you have ever been the child who stood in the driveway while the rest of the family loaded the station wagon, stay with me. This one is for you. Leave a comment and let me know you're here. And if these stories about family and boundaries and starting over mean something to you, go ahead and subscribe. Now let me take you back to the summer I turned 8, and the avocado green suitcase that started all of it. The suitcase appeared on my bed on the last day of 2nd grade. Hard shell, avocado green, gold tone clasp, bought at the Sears out on Wabash Avenue. My mother presented it to me the way you present a birthday gift, with both hands. "Your very own big girl suitcase, Ruth Ann," she said, and she smiled. The church smile, the one she saved for company and casseroles. I was 8 years old. I thought suitcases meant airplanes. I thought airplanes meant Florida, because that is exactly what they had meant for my brother Wade the summer before. Instead, 2 days later, we drove 4 hours south and west, out of Terre Haute, Indiana, across the flat green middle of everything, down to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, where my great-aunt Vera lived in a narrow white house on a bluff over the Mississippi River. My parents stayed for lunch, ham salad sandwiches and iced tea with too much sugar in it. Then my father carried the avocado suitcase up the porch steps and set it by the screen door, and my mother knelt down to my eye level and said the sentence that would follow me the rest of my childhood. "We don't make a fuss in this family." She kissed my forehead. She got in the car, and the 3 of them pulled out of that gravel drive and pointed the station wagon toward the Smoky Mountains, with Wade waving out the back window. I stood on that porch and did exactly what I had been told. I did not make a fuss. I was already very good at it, which should have worried somebody. Now, here is the detail it took me 30 years to say out loud. That trip to the Smokies was booked in March. I know because I found the motel confirmation years later in a shoebox of my mother's papers. The suitcase was bought in April. There was a Sears receipt clipped to it. And nobody said one word to me until the 2nd week of June, which means the plan to send me away existed for 3 entire months before anybody in that house decided I deserved a sentence about it. When people ask me now why I left the way I left, quietly with every detail worked out months in advance, I tell them the honest truth. I learned that method from my mother. She just never expected me to be the one holding the suitcase. Every summer after that had the same shape, worn smooth as a stair tread. 2nd week of June, the avocado suitcase goes in the trunk, 4 hours south, ham salad at Aunt Vera's table, the car pulling away with 3 people in it. And then, sometime in the middle of July, a postcard would arrive with my name on it and my mother's round, cheerful handwriting. Gatlinburg the first year, then Mackinac Island, then Yellowstone, then the Grand Canyon, then Niagara Falls, Myrtle Beach, Yosemite, Washington, D.C., and the last one the summer I was 16 from Cape Cod. 9 summers, 9 cards, and every single one of them carried the same 3 words on the back. "Wish you were here." Aunt Vera would hand the card over without saying anything at all, and later I would catch her sliding it into an old hat box on the shelf above her sewing machine, the way a person keeps evidence for a trial that hasn't been scheduled yet. I used to read those cards the way other kids read the back of a cereal box, over and over, looking for a prize that was never in there. It took me years to notice what was actually missing. Not one of those 9 cards ever said, "We miss you." Not one of them ever said, "Next year you're coming with us." They were never an apology. They were a caption. "Look at the family, having its family vacation." Every September, our teacher would hand out that same assignment every kid in Indiana got, what I did on my summer vacation, and I would write about the river in the sewing shop and get a B+, and my mother would put it on the refrigerator with a magnet, right next to a Polaroid of Wade on a rented pontoon boat. Two versions of the same summer, held up by the same magnet. I stopped writing those essays honestly around the fourth year. I started making things up. Nobody ever noticed the difference, and that told me more about my house than the postcards ever did. But I want to be fair to my parents. I have spent most of my adult life learning how to be exactly fair to them and not 1 inch more than that. Because the story does not start with a suitcase. It starts with a hospital. When Wade was 6 and I was 2, he came down with a fever that would not break, and it turned out to be rheumatic fever, and it went after his heart the way it used to go after children back then. It scarred a valve. For 4 years he was in and out of Indianapolis, blue around the mouth, too tired to climb the porch steps, and in 1969 they opened his chest and repaired it. I have no memory of any of that. But I grew up inside the architecture it built. My mother slept so many nights in a vinyl hospital chair that she could fold herself into one like a jackknife. My father worked doubles at the glass plant on Fort Harrison Road to keep the insurance from lapsing. The ladies from the church filled our deep freeze with noodle casseroles. There were coffee cans on the counter at the filling station with Wade's school picture taped to them. And somewhere in that long emergency, my family reorganized itself into a shape with a center. The center was Wade. I understand it. A house on fire organizes itself around the fire. That is not a crime. The surgery worked. In the spring of 1970, the doctor in Indianapolis said the word normal, and my mother cried in the parking garage, and my father bought everybody a hamburger, and there's a photograph of the 4 of us on the hood of that station wagon that still hangs in their hallway. That should have been the end of the emergency. Instead, it became the family's founding document. My parents came out of those years with a mission statement: make it up to Wade, give that boy the childhood the hospital stole, and they came out of it with a belief about me that hardened like concrete in a form. Ruth Ann is the easy one. Ruth Ann is healthy. Ruth Ann never needs a thing. And here is the part I want you to sit with for a second. The vacations without me did not start during his illness. They started in 1972, 2 full years after the doctor said he was fine. The emergency ended. The system it built never did. Nobody ever looked at the little girl carrying her own suitcase up a stranger's porch steps and asked whether the triage was still necessary. By then, triage was just how our family loved. The summer I was 11, I made my case. They were going to Yellowstone. I had a film strip about Old Faithful stuck in my head since March, and I wanted to see it so badly my teeth ached. And I did it properly, too, because even at 11 I was a planner. I packed my own bag a week early. I wrote out a list on notebook paper, titled Reasons I Should Come, in green marker, and my number 1 reason was that I had never in my life seen anything shoot out of the ground. I practiced in the bathroom mirror with the door shut. Then I stood in that kitchen with my list in both hands and delivered it while my mother dried the good glasses, and my father leaned in the doorway, spinning his key ring around one finger. My mother set the towel down. She knelt to my eye level, the way she always did for the hard ones, and her voice went soft as flannel. This trip is for your brother, honey. After everything that boy went through, you understand. And when my chin started doing something I could not control, she tucked my hair behind my ear and finished me off with the family motto. We don't make a fuss. My father said nothing at all. That was his instrument, the whole orchestra of nothing. I went to my room, and I did not make a fuss. I heard the TV come on downstairs. I heard the ordinary sounds of a house that had already moved on to Wednesday. But here's the sound I never got over. Around 9 o'clock that night, I heard the clasp of that suitcase snap shut down in the front hall. I came to the top of the stairs and looked over the railing. The avocado suitcase was sitting by the front door, packed, latched, my good church dress folded in it. I had not touched it since I unpacked it that morning. Somebody had answered my speech hours before I ever gave it. I never asked to come along again, not one time in the 6 summers that followed. I had gotten my answer for all 9 years at once. Now, if this were a simpler story, those summers themselves would have been the punishment. They were not. That is the complicated mercy sitting right in the middle of my childhood. Aunt Vera's narrow white house on that bluff was the one place on this earth where I was not the easy one, or the quiet one, or the one who never needed anything. At Vera's, I was just Ruthie. Vera was my mother's older sister, 6 years older, widowed at 31 when her husband went through the ice on a fishing trip, never remarried, never had children, and she ran an alterations and dressmaking shop on Broadway with her name painted on the glass. Vera's Alterations, hems, zippers, wedding gowns. She put me to work the very first week I ever stayed there, and I do not mean pretend work. Real customers, real pins, and a real cushion strapped to my wrist. Tickets on a spindle by the register with people's names on them. She taught me to run that black Singer the summer I was 9, standing behind me with her hands over my hands on the wheel. Slow is fast, she used to say. Anybody can sew quick. Sewing straight is the trick. When I ruined something, she made me diagnose it like a doctor. Tension too tight. Wrong needle for the weight of that fabric. And then we did it again. At her table, somebody asked me questions, and my answers actually changed things. What we ate, what we listened to, whether we drove down to the river to watch the barges after supper. I once heard her introduce me to a customer as my summer girl, and I walked around the rest of that day feeling like I had been knighted. One night when I was 11, she looked at me across a plate of peach cobbler for a long moment and said, "In this house you are not the quiet one, you're just Ruthie." And then she looked like she was going to say something else. She didn't. She got up and refilled my milk instead. There were a lot of moments like that over those 9 years. Sentences my aunt started walking toward and then turned back from. Like a woman who walks out to the end of a dock and decides the water is too cold after all. This summer I was 12. I found out what was on the other side of those unfinished sentences. It was late, past 11, and I came down for a glass of water. The kitchen light was on. Vera was sitting at the table with the phone receiver against her ear and the cord pulled all the way across the room, and I stopped in that dark hallway because her voice had a sound in it I had never heard before. Sharp, almost begging. "Then let her stay with me for the school year, Doris." Doris is my mother. There was a long silence, long enough that I could hear the towboats out on the river. Then Vera again, and the sharpness had gone cold and flat. "That is not how it would look. That is your answer. That is the whole answer." Another silence. "No, I am not trying to take anything from you. You cannot take what somebody already set out on the porch." I must have made a sound, or maybe the floorboard did it for me, because she turned and saw me standing there in my nightgown with an empty jelly glass in my hand. Her whole face changed costumes in about 1 second. Right back into summer aunt. She told me winter in Cape Girardeau was nothing but gray slush and river fog anyway, and she walked me back upstairs with her warm hand between my shoulder blades. We never spoke about it again. I was 12. I understood only the temperature of it, that something had been asked and something had been refused, and that the refusal had a reason my aunt found unforgivable. I filed it in the drawer where children file things, the drawer that does not open until it is good and ready. It would be 10 more years before I learned exactly what my aunt had offered my mother that night, and the exact 5 words my mother used to turn it down. Something changes in a girl, the year she stops asking. My parents read it as maturity. My teachers wrote self-sufficient on my report cards, and my mother repeated that word at every card party like a trophy she had won herself. What it actually was arithmetic. The fall I turned 14. I opened a spiral notebook and wrote a date at the top of the first page. June 1981. The month I would turn 18 with a diploma in my hand. And underneath it, I started a list that was really a countdown. I priced everything. What a room cost to rent in cities I had never seen. What a used car cost from the classifieds. What a person could put away in a year if she was careful and invisible. And invisible was my first language. The summer I was 16, I ran my first real operation. I asked if I could skip Missouri and stay home to work instead, and I watched my parents approve it in under a minute flat. No follow-up questions while my mother folded shorts for Cape Cod. "She's so independent," she told the neighbor lady over the hedge. The ease of that yes was its own kind of diploma. I worked the counter at Elmore's Drive-In out on Highway 41 all that summer and the next, and every night I banded my tips with a rubber band and slid them into a manila envelope taped to the inside wall of my closet back behind the winter coats. On the front of that envelope I wrote one word, out, out. By graduation, the envelope had become a shoebox, and the shoebox held $2,940, and not one person in that house had ever once asked me what I was saving for. They assumed college. I let them. Colleges send letters, and letters can be intercepted, and I had already made my real plan the old-fashioned way, at a corner table in the public library with an atlas and a legal pad. They thought I was saving for tuition. I was saving for a door. My requirements were cold and simple, far enough that nobody could drive out on a whim to check on me, cheap enough to live on drive, in wages until I found something better, and it had to be a place that needed people who could sew because, thanks to my aunt, that was the one thing my hands could do better than most grown adults in the state of Indiana. I turned pages in that atlas for 2 months. And then, one afternoon, I opened a magazine somebody had left on the library table, and there was a photograph of a town at the mouth of the Columbia River, up in the far corner of Oregon, hills of white houses stacked above the water. Fishing boats, fog coming in over a bridge so long it disappeared into it. Astoria. And I sat there staring at that water, and I remember thinking, that looks like Vera's River. If Vera's River had grown up and moved as far away as a river can get, that was the whole ceremony. No pros and cons list. Some decisions you don't make, you recognize them. I found 3 dry goods stores and a cannery listed in the back pages of an Oregon phone directory the librarian ordered for me, and I mailed off letters asking about work using the return address of my friend Bonnie Teague, whose mother never once checked that mailbox. I told nobody, not one soul, not even Vera, and leaving Vera out was the only part of it that felt like swallowing glass. But I knew my mother. I knew that the day after I vanished, every single person who loved me was going to get sat down at her kitchen table and questioned in that soft church voice. The only way to protect my aunt from having to lie for me was to make sure she had nothing to lie about. In April, an answer came back to Bonnie's mailbox. A dry goods and notion store on Commercial Street needed somebody to sweep, stock shelves, and handle deliveries starting in July. $2.90 an hour. I read that letter 4 times and slept like a queen. Graduation was the first Saturday of June, 1981, out on the football field, folding chairs sinking into the grass. I was up before 5 that morning, and by 6 my 1973 Maverick, $700 of my own tip money, was packed and sitting in the driveway with a tarp over the back window so nobody could see in. The avocado suitcase was in the trunk. The shoebox of cash was under the spare tire. And beside it was one more thing that nobody on God's green earth would have predicted. A second shoebox, this one holding 9 postcards which I had quietly taken out of my aunt's hat box the summer before. Do not ask me why I brought them. At 18 I called it evidence. It took me 20 years to admit it was a bruise I was not done pressing on. My parents did come to my graduation. I want to be accurate about that, because accuracy is the only kind of revenge I have ever fully trusted. They came, they sat, and 40 minutes in, somewhere around the D's, my mother leaned over and whispered that they had to slip out early, because Wade's engagement dinner was that evening over in Indianapolis, and the traffic on 70 gets ugly. She squeezed my wrist. So proud of you, she said. When my row finally stood and a man at a microphone read out Ruth Ann Calder, I walked across that stage and shook a stranger's hand and looked out at 2 empty folding chairs with the program still sitting on the seat. And here is the strange thing. It did not even hurt in the usual way. It felt like a receipt, like the world itemizing one last time exactly what I was to those people so I could leave with the math already done. For 4 years I had wondered whether my plan made me the villain of this family. They left my graduation during the D's, and I stopped wondering. I ate supper with them that night, said I was tired, went up to bed, and at 4 o'clock the next morning I went down the stairs on the outside edges, the way you do, and I left. I left a note on the kitchen table, weighted down with the sugar bowl so it could not be mistaken for trash. I had drafted that note maybe 30 times over the winter, and every draft got shorter because everything true I had to say kept collapsing into fewer and fewer words. The final version said this: I am safe. I am 18. Please do not look for me. I signed it R, the way Vera always shortened me, which was either a clue or a goodbye, and I have never decided which. Then I backed down that driveway with my headlights off and did not turn them on until I was clear to the end of the street. 3 days. 2,200 miles. I slept twice in that Maverick, once behind a truck stop in Nebraska, and once at a rest area in eastern Wyoming, doors locked, seat kicked back, the shoebox riding under the spare tire like a second heartbeat. I ate crackers and bologna out of a cooler, and I bought gas with cash, and I did not call anybody because there was nobody to call. And on the evening of the third day, I came around a bend on Highway 30, and the whole Columbia River opened up in front of me, 4 miles wide, gray and enormous, with that long bridge running out into the fog. The town climbing up the hill, gulls the size of cats sitting on the pilings. 18 years old, everything I owned in a hatchback. Not one person on this earth knew where I was. You would think that would feel like falling. It felt like the first full breath I had taken since I was 8. 11 days later, a police officer knocked on the door of my rooming house, and I opened it knowing exactly who had sent him. Now let me hold that officer right there for a minute, because to understand what happened at that door, you need to see the life that was starting up behind it. The store that hired me sat on Commercial Street, 2 blocks up from the water. Lundgren's Dry Goods and Notions. 40 years old, wood floors gone soft as soap, a brass bell on the door. It belonged to a Finnish woman named Ingrid Lundgren, who was 64 years old and ran that place like a small navy. I swept, I stocked, I unloaded bolts of fabric off a truck every Tuesday until my forearms burned, and I loved it in the way you love the first thing that is entirely your own. I found a room over a garage on Grand Avenue for $90 a month, and when the wall heater quit on me that first November, I did not call the landlord. I want you to notice that, because it took me half my life too. I checked a repair manual out of the library, bought a thermostat for $4 and change, and fixed it myself with the breaker off and my tongue between my teeth. I told myself that was thrift. It was not thrift, it was doctrine. Somewhere in 9 summers I had swallowed the family catechism whole. Needing things is a tax that other people pay, and I would have slept in my coat before I knocked on anybody's door. Remember that about me. It is the flaw this entire story eventually turns on. The week before Christmas, Ingrid's seamstress quit to go have a baby in Portland, and 2 days later a woman came in with a wedding dress that needed the bodice taken in 3/4 of an inch, and Ingrid stood there looking at that dress like it was a car wreck. "Anybody back there sew?" she said to the room. My hand was up before my shyness got a vote. She stood over me with her arms crossed the entire time, and I did it the way I had done it 100 times in a shop on Broadway in Cape Girardeau, with the pins in the cushion on my wrist and my aunt's voice in my ear, slow as fast. Ingrid turned that bodice inside out, looked at my stitching for about 10 seconds, and asked me where I learned. "My aunt," I said. "Then your aunt raised a seamstress," she said, and walked off. I stood there over that dress like somebody had handed me a passport. Now, the officer, he was younger than I expected and visibly bored, which turned out to be the best thing he could possibly have been. My mother had filed a missing person report in Vigo County the Monday after graduation, and what found me was not detective work, it was paperwork. I had turned in my Indiana driver's license to get an Oregon one, and that record went into a state system, and 11 days later a patrolman was standing on my landing with his hat in his hand. I gave him my license and my rent receipt. He looked at both, looked at me, and asked the only question the law actually cares about. "Are you here of your own free will, ma'am?" I said yes. He had me sign a form saying I was a voluntary missing adult, and then he explained it to me in the tone of a man reading off a bus schedule. "Your family will be notified that you have been located and that you are safe. They will not be told where you are. That is your right." And that was the whole miracle right there. The system my mother was certain would fetch me home instead pulled a curtain between us and nailed it to the floor, and all her church voice charm could not part it, because a curtain does not negotiate. Before he left, that young officer looked at his notepad and got a little uncomfortable and said, "Ma'am, the reporting party asked me to pass along a message." And he read it off to me in block capitals in a stranger's handwriting. "Tell her this is very dramatic. We raised her better than this. We do not make a fuss in this family." I took that piece of paper from him. I thanked him. I shut the door. and I dropped it in the wastebasket without folding it. For the next 4 years, that was the last thing my mother's voice ever said in my life, delivered secondhand in a policeman's handwriting at the top of a staircase in Oregon. 2 full years into that town, the avocado suitcase was still packed. I want to be honest about what that means. I had a room, I had a job I was good at, I had a rent receipt with my own name on it, and I had a suitcase sitting by the closet door that I had never once fully emptied. Like some part of me was still standing on a porch in Missouri, waiting for a car to come back. One Sunday night in my 3rd October, I finally laid it flat on the floor to empty it out for good. And at the bottom, under a folded church dress I had long since grown out of, was the shoebox. 9 postcards, Gatlinburg to Cape Cod, in order. My mother's round handwriting grinning up at me. Wish you were here. I carried that box down the back stairs to the burn barrel behind the garage, and I stood out there in the cold with a book of matches in my fist for a long, long time. And then I went back upstairs. Not because I forgave anybody, because burning them felt like one more disappearance, and I was so tired of solving things by vanishing. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen, and I turned each one of those 9 cards over, and underneath my mother's caption I wrote down what that summer had actually been. Summer 3. I taught myself to swim in the river because nobody was there to watch me do it. Summer 5. I stopped crying at drop-off, and every adult in my life praised me for it. Summer 8. Aunt Vera asked me what I wanted for once, and I could not answer her because nobody had ever asked me the question. 9 cards, 2 handwritings, 2 versions of one childhood. I put that box on the shelf above my stove where a person keeps things she actually intends to look at. I told myself I kept them as receipts. The truth is, some part of me was still waiting for somebody in that family to ask to read the other side. By my 3rd year, I was running Lundgren's back room, alterations, wedding work, upholstery for the Marine outfit down the street, and more of the front counter too, on the mornings when Ingrid's hands were bad, which was more mornings than that woman would ever admit. She was 67 by then. One February afternoon she sat me down with 2 cups of coffee and laid it out plain, the way she did everything. She wanted to quit while her niece still let her keep a garden. The store was worth about $34,000 with the inventory and the fixtures. She had 2 offers on the table, one from a chain out of Portland that wanted the building and not the business, and one from a man who used the words video rental in her fabric department and was lucky to leave that store alive. I am not selling 40 years to somebody who will gut it, she said. I would rather sell it slow to somebody who will love it. And then she looked at me in a way that made the back of my neck go warm. $9,000 down. I carry the rest myself, monthly, like they did it in the old days, for somebody I trust. She let that sit exactly as long as it needed to sit. I went home that night and taped a sheet of graph paper to the inside of my closet door, and at the top I wrote $9,000, and underneath it, in pencil, I wrote the number I actually had, 4,110. For the next year and a half, that sheet of paper was my religion. Overtime, side work, no telephone in the apartment, booths resoled instead of replaced, coffee at home, 5,002, 6,004, 7,009. People talk about buying a business. That is not what this was. This was the first thing in my entire life that I had ever wanted out loud, at full volume, where losing it could actually hurt me. A place with my name on the deed, in a town I chose, where nobody could ever again decide which members of the household counted as the family. Ingrid only ever made one condition. "Don't disappear on me," she said. I laughed. She didn't. Now I have to tell you about the one thread I never cut, because without it, nothing at the end of the story makes any sense. Every year, in the 2nd week of June, I bought 1 postcard of the Astoria waterfront, the tourist kind, fishing boats and fog. No return address, no signature, and I always checked to make sure the town name was not printed anywhere in the picture. On the back, where a message goes, I drew 1 small thimble, just a doodle the way you would draw it on a napkin, and I mailed it to a sewing shop on Broadway in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. That first June, I stood at that mailbox for 10 solid minutes before I let it drop, running the risk like a bank auditor. Vera would know my mother's questions were coming. Vera would have to carry that secret across every holiday table in a family that already considered her the odd sister. It was not a small thing I was asking of a woman I was not even speaking to. I dropped it anyway, because the alternative was letting her spend the rest of her life wondering whether I was alive. She never wrote back. She had no address to write back to. 4 postcards over 4 years, a thimble instead of a name. That was our entire correspondence, and my aunt read it exactly right. She of all people knew how much a person can say on the back of a postcard. What I did not know, and would not learn until everything cracked open, was what keeping that secret was costing her at every single family gathering in the state of Indiana. My safety had a price. She just never once sent me the bill. Quilt was Ingrid's idea, and I want that on the record. Because for 4 years the whole shape of my life had one rule underneath it: stay small, stay unfindable. I had been piecing it at night for 2 years without really admitting what it was. 9 blocks, 1 for each summer, a river block, a thimble block, a suitcase block nobody but me would ever recognize as a suitcase. I called it 9 summers because that is what it was. Ingrid saw it spread across the cutting table one evening and told me it was going in the Clatsop County Fair, and she did not phrase it as a question. And when I started listing reasons it should not, she said the thing that ended the argument. "You cannot run a business from inside a hiding place, Ruth Ann." So I entered it, and in August of 1985 it took the blue ribbon, and a photographer from the county paper took my picture standing next to it in a clean apron, and I stood there feeling proud in a way that felt like walking on a brand new floor, testing every board. Here is what neither of us thought about. The wire services pick up fair photos in August. It is a slow news month. That photograph, 1 woman, 1 quilt, 1 caption, went out on the app wire and ran in about 40 Sunday papers across this country all the way to the other side of the Mississippi, including a paper called the Indianapolis Star. And a second cousin of my mother's, a woman I could not have picked out of a lineup, was sitting at her kitchen table in Brazil, Indiana, on a Sunday morning with her coffee, and she looked at that photograph and said out loud to nobody, "Well, that's Doris's girl." It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, that dead hour between the lunch crowd and closing, and I was at the cutting table measuring off 6 yards of muslin when the brass bell over the door rang. I said I'd be right with them before I ever looked up. Then I looked up. My mother was standing in the middle of my store. 4 years, 2,200 miles, and there she was, between the pattern books and the button wall, in her good wool coat, her hair grayer than the version of her I had been arguing with in my head all that time. Behind her, holding the door, the way he held every door of my entire childhood, silently, was my father. He looked smaller, and his right hand, down at his side, was trembling, a fine, steady shiver, like a telephone set on a table. And some cold, clinical part of me noticed that, and filed it away before I could even form a word. Nobody moved. The radiator ticked. I watched my mother take it all in with one slow sweep of the room, the way she was so very good at. The bolts of fabric stacked to the ceiling. The blue ribbon pinned to the corkboard by the register. My apron with the shop's name on it tied twice around my waist because it was cut for somebody bigger. 4 years. And I remember thinking, whatever comes out of her mouth first is going to tell me everything, the way the first sentence always did in our family. She finished her inspection. She looked at me, at my whole standing, solvent, unfussed over life, and she pressed her lips together in the way she always did right before the church smile, and she said, "So this is what you left your family for." That was when I knew they had not driven 2 days for an apology. They had driven 2 days for a pickup. I made them coffee on the hot plate in the back. I want you to understand why, because it was not weakness. A woman who owns her own ground can afford to pour coffee on it. They sat on the 2 stools by the counter, like customers, and for 20 minutes my mother gave me the authorized history of my own childhood, and I listened to it the way you would listen to a tour guide describing your own house. In her version, I had 9 wonderful summers with an aunt I adored. In her version, they had given me independence, which is the greatest gift a parent can give, and look how well it turned out. Look at this place. In her version, my disappearance was a phase, a cruelty she had borne with grace, and one we certainly did not need to relitigate now that I had gotten it out of my system. And here is the part that frightened me, truly frightened me. She was not lying. You can hear lying. My mother believed every syllable of it, the way you believe a road you have driven for 40 years. Somewhere across those decades, she had built a version of our family in which every single choice was love, and she lived in it the way we had all lived in that house on Ohio Street, comfortably, without ever once checking the basement. My father said almost nothing, which was its own kind of fluency. His finger tapped an uneven little rhythm on the counter that he did not seem to know about. Twice I caught him looking at that blue ribbon on the corkboard with an expression I had no file for. Finally I asked the question 4 years had sharpened to a point. Why did it take so long to find me, if any of this mattered? And my father, my silent father, opened his mouth for the first time since the bell rang. I did, he said, barely a breath in it. My mother's hand landed on his sleeve, light as a napkin. And he stopped. Then she folded her hands on my counter and got down to the business of the trip. Your father has Parkinson's disease, she said. They confirmed it in the spring, early stages, the tremor, the stiffness, you've seen his hand. She said it the way you would report the weather, and then she let the silence take a lap around the room. And I stood there holding a coffee cup while that word rearranged the man on the stool by the window into somebody I was now going to lose twice. He looked up at me and gave a small, apologetic shrug, as though the disease were a guest he had invited by accident. And then my mother kept right on going, because the diagnosis was never the point of the sentence, it was the runway. Wade cannot be expected to manage this. He has the baby and the new territory. He's on the road 4 days a week, you understand. And those words landed in the exact grooves that 9 summers had carved. Somebody's needs, and then me, the one without any. She reached across the counter and took my wrist, the same squeeze as graduation. And she said the sentence she had crossed 6 states to deliver. You've always been the strong one, Ruth Ann. It's time to come home. Home by Thanksgiving, she meant. We'll tell everybody together. A family announcement. She was already working on the guest list out loud. I looked down at her hand on my wrist, the good ring, the chipped polish on her thumbnail. And the strangest thing happened. I felt the exact weight of it, and it weighed exactly what a luggage tag weighs. 4 years, 2,200 miles. A curtain the law had hung between us. A life built board by board with my own cracked hands. And the first complete sentence my mother had for me was a work assignment. The position of the strong one had reopened, and I was being recalled. I took my wrist back gently, the way you take a paring knife away from a child. And I said, no. Not a speech, not a trembling manifesto. 1 word. And then, because I had 6 yards of muslin to cut and a customer coming at 4, I told them the shop needed me and that the chowder at the place on 12th Street was worth stopping for before the drive back. My mother's face went through something complicated and settled on wounded dignity, her home parish. Through the front glass, I watched her steer my father toward the car. He looked back at me one time. I did not wave, and neither did he. And somehow that was the most honest exchange the 3 of us had managed all afternoon. That night the phone rang at the shop. Wade. My mother had gotten my number out of me at that counter, and I had surrendered it just to end the visit. I almost did not pick up. I am glad I did. And I want to be fair to my brother, exactly as fair as I promised to be to everyone, and not 1 inch more. He did not open with the family script. He opened with a question, quiet and off balance. Is it true you hated going to Aunt Vera's? And I said I never hated Vera's. I hated what it meant. And then I told him what it meant, all of it, the trip booked in March, the suitcase bought in April, the porch, the 9 postcard. The line went so quiet I checked to make sure it had not dropped. Then my brother, 26 years old, said, Mom told me my whole life that you loved it down there, that you asked to go. And his voice came apart on the last word of it. He did not ask me to come home and nurse anybody. He asked exactly one thing. Don't disappear on me again. After we hung up, I sat a long time in that dark store looking up at the shelf where a shoebox sat above a hot plate. Because here's the part nobody warns you about. Cutting contact is one decision. Staying gone is a decision you make again every single morning of your life. If you have ever had to choose between your peace and your family's version of you, do me a favor and put I chose me down in the comments so the next person scrolling by knows she is not the only one. And stay with me, because the dinner that changed everything is coming. I called Vera the next night, and the moment she heard my voice, she knew something had happened. Our entire relationship for 4 years had been one wordless postcard a year, and now here I was, talking. "They found me," I said. And I told her about the store, and the coffee, and the recall notice. She was quiet for a moment. And then my aunt took a breath and paid off a debt that was 13 years past due. "You were 12, she said. "You came down for water. I know you heard some of it. Here's the rest." That summer, she had offered to take me for the school year, not a visit. Enrolled at the junior high on Sprigg Street. My own room, the one with the window over the river, her paying for every bit of it, my parents free to orbit Wade full-time. Me raised in a house where somebody actually looked up when I walked into a room. She had the paperwork half filled out. She had rehearsed that phone call for 3 weeks before she ever dialed it. And my mother listened to the whole offer, all the way to the end, and turned it down flat. And the reason she gave was not that she would miss me. The reason, word for word, after all these years, was this: that is not how it would look. A daughter shipped off for good, people would ask questions at church. A daughter loaned out for summers, well, that is just staying with family. That is wholesome. 9 summers was the exact maximum my absence could weigh, while the family portrait still hung level. My whole childhood had been portioned out to the precise limit of appearances. I stood in my kitchen in Oregon holding that phone, doing the one piece of arithmetic I had never let myself do. It was never thoughtlessness. It was policy. And then Vera said the other thing. "I should have thought harder, sweetheart. Come to Thanksgiving with me, not for them, for you, so you never again have to wonder who you'd be in that room." I did not sleep much for 3 nights. I would like to tell you the debate was about my parents. It was mostly about a sheet of graph paper. 8,400, that is where the number stood. $600 short of shaking Ingrid Lundgren's hand after 4.5 years of resoled boots. Going back to Indiana was not a plane ticket. It was a breach in the hull of my whole life, and I knew myself well enough to know why it terrified me. If that house got its hooks back into me, the strong one would do exactly what the strong one always does. Absorb, accommodate, disappear in place. Which is the one kind of disappearing I had not tried yet. On the 4th morning I did the thing I had never once done in my adult life. I asked for help out loud with the whole truth attached to it. I sat Ingrid down at her own cutting table before we opened, and I told her everything. Indiana, the summers, the suitcase, my father's hand, the number on the graph paper, and what I was afraid that Thanksgiving might cost me, in money and in nerve. She heard me all the way out with her arms crossed. Then she said, "This store has been here 40 years. It can wait 3 weeks. And then, because Ingrid Lundgren never in her life missed the center of a target, she added, "Can you?" I booked the flight that afternoon. Portland to Indianapolis, the day before Thanksgiving. And then I did something I could not fully explain at the time. I got the avocado suitcase down off the top of the closet and packed it for the trip. 4 years it had sat up there, empty and retired. If I was walking back into that house, I was walking in carrying the luggage they had trained me on. Call it a witness, some evidence you carry, and some evidence carries you. Vera drove down from Missouri and met me at the gate in Indianapolis, and the sight of her standing there, gray now, scanning the crowd exactly the way she used to scan the riverbank for me, undid more of my composure than the entire flight had. We got a motel room out by the interstate. I want that detail noticed, 2 grown women with family in that town, and we got a motel, because a boundary you cannot walk out of is not a boundary. It is a guest room. That evening we stopped by the house, a courtesy call before the main event, and my childhood home performed an autopsy on itself for me, room by room. The hallway wall was weighed in every size ever manufactured. Little League, prom, the parking garage photo from 1970, his wedding, a museum with 1 wing. I appeared twice on that wall, both times in a class composite, 1 face among 24. My old bedroom is a sewing room now, which is a joke so cruel that God must have written it himself. My mother announced it brightly, like good news about real estate. There was a machine in there she had never learned to thread. And then, on top of the kitchen hutch, I saw the other shoebox. Her postcards, the same 9 trips. The duplicates she had kept fanned out in a wicker basket next to a candle. Curated, displayed. Our family kept 2 archives of the same 9 summers. Hers in a basket, for company to admire. Mine above a hot plate in Oregon, with the truth written on the backs. Same cards. Different museums. My father walked me out to the car when we left, under the porch light, the same porch light. He pressed a piece of paper into my hand, folded down small, the way men of that generation fold anything they cannot say. His hand shook against mine, from the disease or from the moment I could not tell you. "Read it after," was all he managed. I put it in my coat pocket, and it sat there all night, ticking. Thanksgiving arrived, camera ready, because my mother produces holidays the way the networks produce a finale. 14 at the table, both leaves in, the good china with the gold rims, cloth napkins folded into fans standing up in the water glasses. The guest list was the full repertory cast, my great-uncle Rex and his wife, 2 of my mother's cousins, the Hartleys from next door, and Wade's family, his wife Kathy and their little girl Jenny, who was 4 years old and spent the afternoon orbiting the dessert table like a small moon. I came with Vera, and I came carrying a 9-inch pie in a white box because I had spent the morning in the motel kitchenette making it, and because Vera's hands taught my hands, and it was about to sit in the middle of my mother's table, which meant that for one afternoon all 3 of my worlds would be stacked on. The same trivet. My mother met us at the door with a church smile at full wattage and cast the entire room in a single breath. There she is, our world traveler. Isn't she thin? Jenny hid behind Kathy's leg and studied me, this tall stranger. My father sat at the head of the table, and I watched him negotiate with the water glasses, and I looked away, because he caught me looking. And honestly, it went fine. Fine the way holidays are fine, small talk, casserole logistics, Rex's opinions about the interstate construction on 41. Then the turkey landed, and the sweet potatoes went around, and my mother stood up at her end of that table and picked up her glass and rang it with the edge of a spoon. Ting, ting, ting. Before we eat, I have some wonderful news to share with the family. And here's the thing about my mother and me. We had both come to that table with an announcement. She just assumed hers was the only one in the room. She delivered it in 2 movements, like a woman who had rehearsed it in the shower. First, the minor key. As some of you know, Ray has been having some trouble with his health this year, and the doctors have confirmed that it's Parkinson's disease. The table did what tables do. The soft gasp. Rex's wife with her hand to her collarbone. "Oh, Ray! Oh, Doris!" My father studied his plate through every bit of it, like a man being discussed at his own funeral. And then my mother lifted her chin and modulated into the major key, the part she had driven 2,000 miles to set up. "But here is the wonderful news," she said. "Ruth Ann is moving home to help take care of her father." She let it land. And then she garnished it. She's always been our strong one. And that room burst into exactly the response she had catered. Rex said, "Atta girl," and lifted his beer. One of the cousins actually clapped. 3 little pats. Mrs. Hartley pressed a napkin to her eye and said, "What a good daughter." And my mother received all of it with a slow, humble nod, the conductor accepting applause on behalf of the orchestra, while her hand came to rest on my shoulder. And I understood, sitting there, that I was the announcement, the same way the turkey was the centerpiece. I looked around at 14 faces, glowing at a sentence about my life that had never once been said to my face as a question. And the recognition was so precise it was almost chemical. A trip booked in March, a suitcase bought in April, a daughter informed in June. 13 years later, the exact same machine. And the machine had never once considered that the part might decline. And then, right into the middle of the applause, little Jenny's voice came up out of her booster seat, clear as a dinner bell, with the one question nobody in that room could survive. She pointed her fork at me and asked her mother, "Who is that lady?" Kathy shushed her, going red to her ears, but the question just hung there over the good china. because out of the mouths of babes, that was the actual state of this family. The strong one was a stranger to the newest member of it. My brother stared at his plate. My father looked up at me, and I set my napkin beside my plate, and I stood up. Here is what 4 years of running a small store had taught me. You never outshout a room. You lower your voice until the room has to come to you. So I stood there until the last chuckle died out on its own. And then I spoke at about the volume you would use to read a bedtime story. You're right, Mom, I said. I never made a fuss. I made a life. And because I finally had the floor at that table, 22 years into being a piece of furniture at it, I kept my sentences short, and I set them down one at a time, like place settings. I'm not moving home. Rex started to say something and thought better of it. But nobody in this family is ever going to say, I left my father shaking at a table. So here is what is going to happen instead. And I told them that I had spent the past week on the telephone with a home health agency in Indianapolis, licensed, bonded, the one the neurologist's office recommends, 3 mornings a week to start and more as he needs it. The bills come to me in Oregon. It is already arranged. The first nurse comes Monday morning at 8. I did not tell that table what it cost. I will tell you, because you have earned the arithmetic. It was the graph paper, it was the down payment, or very nearly all of it, 4.5 years of resoled boots and no telephone and nothing new, a number I could have recited in my sleep, redirected in a single phone call from a motel room. Ingrid's handshake was going to have to wait, and the waiting did not have an end date I could see. My mother's face went through its whole repertoire, wounded, then parliamentary. She reached for the gavel. After everything this family has given you, she began, and I did not raise my voice at all. You gave me a suitcase, Mom, every June. It came out so quiet that the table leaned in, and then the sentence finished detonating, and not one fork moved. I watched Mrs. Hartley turn and look at my mother, and I watched that look not bounce off, and that was new. Second, I said, I'll visit Dad twice a year, and I'll call him on Sundays. I come as a guest, invited, not assigned. And third, my name is retired from family announcements. Nothing about my life ever gets stood up and read to a table again unless I am the one standing. That's the whole deal. There isn't a negotiation in it. My mother set down her glass with a click and went to her last resort, the oldest exit on the property. If you walk out of this house, she said, don't bother coming back. And there it was, the full price invoiced in front of witnesses. The daughter who pays for the nurse and calls on Sundays becomes, in the authorized version, the girl who abandoned her sick father at Thanksgiving. I knew the story she would tell before the door even shut behind me. I paid it anyway. I looked at my mother and I said, that house key hasn't fit me since I was 8 years old. And then my father pushed back his chair and gripped the edge of the table and stood up, shaking, and the entire room stopped breathing. But before he could get a single word up out of his chest, my mother broke. Not into tears. My mother does not do tears in front of the good china. She broke off script, which for her is far more naked than crying. She was still holding the edge of that table, and she said to nobody in particular, in a voice I had never once heard her use, I was 12. The whole table turned to her. I was 12, she said again, when your grandmother's hip went and never came right. Vera was 18 and already gone, working over in Paducah, and somebody had to do the cooking and the washing and the lifting and the getting her to the bathroom at 2 a.m. And it was me, it was always me, and nobody ever asked me either. She stopped one beat too late. The way you stop when you hear your own voice say the thing you have spent 50 years not saying. Nobody ever asked me either. And there it was, the whole machine, the suitcase, the postcards, the strong one. None of it was something my mother invented. It was something she inherited, the way you inherit a table. She had been the girl at the sink, and she survived it by deciding that being unasked was a badge of honor. And then she pinned that same badge on her own daughter, with pride, because it was the only way she knew how to say, you are like me. For one long second, I saw her at 12 years old, at a stove too tall for her, and I felt the near miss of loving her the way you love somebody you might have become. And Vera spoke from the far end of that table, very softly, across 50 years. Doris, she isn't you. Let her go. My mother looked at me, and I did the only thing left that was both true and kind. I know, Mom, I said. Nobody asked you. That is exactly why I'm stopping it here. So nobody at this table ever has to be asked again. They just get to belong. She did not answer me. She sat down very straight and looked at the water glasses, chain, meat bolt cutters, and then I turned to the one person still standing. My father stood at the head of that table with both hands flat on the wood, the tremor running out through the cider glasses, and everybody waited for a speech that was never coming. Because 31 years at a glass plant teaches a man that words are something other people send out to be printed. He looked at me and he said, "Read it." So I did, right there, standing at that table, because he had earned witnesses, and so had I. I unfolded the paper from my coat pocket. It was a photocopy of an invoice, dated October 1982, 14 months after I left. Halloran Investigations, Indianapolis, Indiana Retainer, skip trace, locate attempt, and stamped across the bottom in red, no result. Case closed at client request. And underneath that, in my father's up-and-down pressman's handwriting, gone shaky at the tails now, a note he must have written that week, found nothing. Your mother said to stop. She said you would come back when you needed us. I stopped. I should not have stopped. I am sorry, Ruthie. I stood there holding 14 months of my father looking for me. It did not fix anything. He had hired a man instead of raising his voice, and when the man came back empty, he folded the way he always folded. He knew it too. That is what the paper was. A confession that he quit, written out by the only person at that table honest enough to put his own failure in ink. But here is what it also was. Proof that once, before the story got rewritten, somebody in that house had actually looked. I folded it back up small, the way he folds things, and I put it in my pocket to keep. Then I came around the table and put my hand over his shaking one, and I said, "The nurse comes Monday at 8, Dad. And when you're ready to fly out and see the ocean, I have a room, and I will teach you to run a straight seam." Vera got our coats. And out on that porch, on the same boards where an avocado suitcase used to sit waiting every June, I finally finished the sentence I had been writing since I was 8 years old. It took them 4 years to find me. It took me 9 summers to stop waiting to be found. Now here is the ledger, 1 year on, because I promised you accuracy, not a bow. The nurse's name is Alma, and she started that Monday at 8 sharp. My father sends me Polaroids now in envelopes with too many stamps on them. Terrible pictures. Half them, most of them. The first one was Alma and him side by side on the Davenport, both scowling into the flash like hostages, and on the white strip at the bottom he had written, "She counts my pills the way your mother counts silverware." It is the longest joke that man has made in 20 years. We talk on Sundays, short calls, 8-9 minutes, and they are enough. And enough is a fortune, where I come from. My mother and I have not spoken. At Christmas, a card came to the store, tasteful, poinsettias, nothing written inside it except her name in that round hand. Mom. Not sorry, not love, just the title she is not ready to lose. Some doors slam in this life, some just settle closed. Ingrid and I signed the papers in March. When my number came up short, she waved her hand and redrew the whole note herself. 5,000 down instead of 9, the balance folded into the monthly, 3 more years on the term. It will cost me more in the long run. I signed it smiling because it turns out that a dream with a lion on it is still a dream. There is a new line of gold paint on the door glass under Ingrid's name, small because I asked for small. R.A. Calder, proprietor. In July, a rental car pulled up out front, and my brother got out and unbuckled his daughter from the back seat. They stayed 4 days. Wade fixed the loading door that had been dragging since 1978. Jenny ate blackberry pie with both hands and renamed me Aunt Buttons, which I have legally accepted. And on the last morning, Wade stood a long time at the shelf above my stove, where the shoebox sits open now, and he read the back of every single one of those 9 cards, his mother's handwriting on one side, his sister's on the other. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he squared them up, put them back in the box, and said, "I'm sorry I never turned the cards over." That is the entire apology I got out of Indiana that year. It is also the only one that was ever going to matter. Which brings me to the next Thanksgiving, the first one at the store. We pushed every table and cutting bench in that building into one long line, back room to front window, and we fed whoever had nowhere better to be. The girl who works Saturdays, 2 regulars, the Guatemalan family that took over the bakery on 12th, a widower named Gus who pays for his shirt repairs and firewood, 21 chairs, no fans in the water glasses, no announcements. Ingrid, said Grace in 2 languages. Vera flew out for it, first airplane she had boarded in 11 years, and I put her at the head of that table because every kingdom ought to watch its true queen eat. Before the pie, I handed her a postcard, Astoria on the front, fishing boats and fog. And on the back, in my handwriting, that same old familiar greeting with its exclamation point, "Wish you were here." She read it, and she laughed. And then she stopped laughing, and she looked down the whole long steaming length of that table, out the front window, to the real river beyond it. And for the first time in my entire life, the person the card was meant for was already in the room. The avocado suitcase lies on top of the pantry shelf now. It holds the holiday tablecloth. Twice a year I take it down and shake out the linens and set the longest table in Clatsop County with the luggage that was supposed to teach me how to leave quietly. And as for what I learned, it fits in one sentence. Family is not the people who share your blood or your last name. Family is the people who never have to send you a postcard because they never let you be the one who is missing. That is my story. 9 summers, 1 green suitcase, and a name painted on a door. If this reminded you of the summers you spent being the strong one, tell me about it down in the comments. I read every single one of them. Share this with somebody who needs their own long table, and I will see you in the next one.